Please be seated. So on this Transfiguration Sunday, I thought we might start with a story about what glory is not. It might surprise anybody who's seen a guy who looks a lot like me shuffling slowly through Overton Park each morning that once upon a time I actually could run fairly fast. And in the spring of my 9th grade year, I was lined up on a track with a few teammates and a whole bunch of enemies from places like Harrison and Rogers and Mountain Home. Those are Arkansas towns, by the way, some of which had populations in excess of 10,000 people. This was absolutely the big time, friends. We were about to compete in the mile run at the 1 AAA junior high district track meet in Arkansas. Now, over the course of this 1982 season, I'd got my mile time down to within just a couple of seconds of 5 minutes. This would be my last race as a junior high runner. And as you know well, there are only two kinds of people in this world: those who've run a mile in under 5 minutes in junior high and those who haven't. The weather was nice. I'd managed to get a lane near the inside on the front row. All was right with the world as the starter explained to us that there would be only two commands: runners to your mark, and then the gun. He then sternly reminded us that everybody had to get completely still when called to their marks. Then he raised his right arm and said, "Runners to your mark, everybody still," and fired his pistol into the air. Now, the more attentive ones among you will have noticed that a phrase was added to what the starter told us so carefully he was about to say. And at that unscripted, "everybody still," a certain jittery runner from Siloam Springs took right off. And in the moments to follow, that same jittery runner learned that if you do happen to false start in the mile, there are no second chances. You're disqualified. You don't break 5 minutes in the mile as a junior high runner, ever. What you do is you turn around and walk slowly past the bleachers toward where your team is camped out, which, if memory serves, was a distance of, 7 or 8 miles. To this day, I'm the only person I know of who's ever false started in the mile run. Is there anybody here that's a member of this very exclusive club? No, okay. Glory. Has glory, or what you thought was some version of glory, ever seemed just within reach, and then you fail so spectacularly that you're pretty sure you're a more miserable failure than anyone's ever been anywhere and ever? Well, I said this was a story about what glory is not, but maybe not for the reasons you think. You see, most of the time when we use this word glory, we're referring to some kind of achievement, aren't we? We accomplish something wonderful, and then we get to bask in the glory of having done so, right? And take it from me, if this is the glory we're talking about, your own glory is the only kind worth basking in. I had no interest in hanging around the finish line to get in on a little of that cursed David Briggs's glow as he won yet another mile. But here's the thing. Leaning victorious into the finish line tape is not glory either. At least it's not in biblical terms. Glory in the Bible is not an achievement any more than gravity or waxing tides are achievements. Glory is simply an aspect of reality that occasionally becomes visible to us humans in what seem like unbearable ways. Because glory is an aspect of God. Glory is what you encounter when you glimpse something of the one who holds everything that is in being. That's what some of the stranger stories of the Bible seem to tell us, and I believe they might just be true. On the Feast of the Transfiguration, we read two strange passages that are beautiful, but it's hard to know what to do with them, isn't it? Moses comes down from Sinai with the 2 stone tablets of the law and a shining face, and the writer of Exodus doesn't mean he was wearing a very big smile. Moses has to put a veil over his glowing head when he visits with people. He removes it only when he goes off to talk to God again, absorbing more of this glory each time he does, like those glow-in-the-dark frisbees we used to leave out in the sun to recharge. Jesus' transfiguration clearly was meant to echo Moses's. In fact, Moses is present in this dreamlike scene. He's there with Elijah, making sure we don't miss this connection. We're told Peter and James and John were weighed down with sleep, but since they managed to stay awake, they saw this so-called glory lighting up Jesus like Moses the second. Now, clearly in the arc of the scriptural story, this scene has important symbolic meaning. Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets, and Jesus will say his life and work are a fulfillment of these. But what if these shining faces aren't just shorthand for something important's happening right here? What if this glory of God really is a thing? And if it is, could it possibly matter to people like you and me whose faces are really as dull as anybody else's on most days? When St. Paul says the Christian life is like a race, when he says we're to press on toward the goal, or that we need to live like a boxer who focuses his punches rather than flailing our arms in the air, these metaphors give me something to do. I like that. I get that. But the only achievement credited to Peter and James and John at the Transfiguration is not falling asleep. And then when Peter says, "Wow, Jesus, we're having a moment. Let's do something. Let's build some dwellings for you and Moses and Elijah like we do during our festival of booths," well, we're told that all this doing was evidence that Peter didn't get it. He didn't know what he was saying. There was nothing yet at least, to do except stay awake and watch. Sometimes I need to be told that sometimes there's nothing to be done. Not yet. So often we do approach these lives we've been given like races to be run as hard and fast as we can. And it's true that life demands discipline and effort, and that there's a certain God-given joy that comes from putting our gifts and passions to work in the world. Calvary's known as a congregation of doers, to be sure. It wouldn't surprise me if that reputation goes all the way back to our founding on Transfiguration Sunday 186 years ago. And it's part of what drew me to you. But if our scriptures are to be trusted, faithful action flows out from the encounter with the glory of God. Just as Jesus descended that mountain to return to a world where children are still seized by dark spirits and began to bring it healing. But the encounter with God's glory came first. Maybe it's meant to be the same with us. I don't mean we're supposed to sit around until somebody's face is transfigured into a shining circle of light. I guess what I mean is that trusting that there really is a glory like what changed the faces of Moses and Jesus beneath and within all that is can change us too. The world is charged with the grandeur of God, wrote Gerard Manley Hopkins. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. Do you believe this? When you look closely and quietly at the natural world as Hopkins did, or when you look deep into the eyes of someone you love, or really any human being at all, if you can stand it, when you look closely and without judgment at whatever is in front of you now, do you not believe a little bit in a glory that human beings do not get to make for ourselves? I don't think that's unrelated to whatever happened on Sinai. I don't think that's unrelated to whatever happened at the Transfiguration. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things, says Hopkins in the same poem. If only we could live in a deeper awareness of that freshness. If only we lived as though creation really were charged with the glory of God, would our gratitude not change everything we then end up doing? I have to say, living in that grateful state seems a lot harder than it ought to be if there really are bits of divine glory all around us. I've found that for everything lovely and glorious that I've forgotten, the memory of an embarrassing failure from 36 years ago is as vivid to my mind as yesterday's dinner. Why is that? Why does failure burn itself into our brains like cattle brands when glory and goodness seem so much harder to hang on to? And good grief. How many of the failures we do retain are only in living up to all kinds of made-up measures. There's no such thing as a mile or a minute, you know. Not really. The world may really spin on its axis once a day, but what six-fingered knucklehead divided a day into 24 hours and each hour into 60 minutes? I'll never know. But the failure to cover 5,280 of the length of some Roman's feet in 5 of those made-up minutes while one's still in what used to be called junior high, I mean, is any of that failure really real? And how many made-up measures do you use in assessing your own life? Are they really more real than the dearest freshness that lives deep down things? Are they really more real than the glory of God? I doubt they are a little more each day, even if I forget that I doubt it a minute later. In a few moments, we're going to baptize Logan Graves. He's going to promise all kinds of impossible things before we do that. Things like serving Christ in all persons, loving his neighbor as himself. He's going to promise to respect the dignity of every last human being on earth. It's essential stuff for followers of Jesus, but a tall order. And then we'll douse him in a little water and anoint his forehead with oil, promising that he's now been marked as Christ's own forever. But I wonder, and to be clear, no one's asked me, but I still wonder what it would say if we came in strong with the water first and let the promises follow that. As I recall, a glorious voice from heaven at Jesus' baptism declared him God's beloved before he had anything to say at all. The temptations and the forgiveness and the healings, they all spilled out from there. Would it not be somehow true to the fundamental place of God's glory in our lives if the water and the oil and the insistence that a person is Christ's own came first, if not in our liturgy, then maybe in our minds? I'm not really interested in rewriting the prayer book, but I am interested in leaving behind the false measures we give our lives to and learning to trust that the goodness and love and glory of God are more real than anything we humans will ever make or ever do. More real than our failures, to be sure. Glory remains, because glory was here from the beginning. And if we could trust a little more deeply that this is so, maybe the next transfigured faces in this story really could be our own.